The interview was supposed to be another calm discussion about Meghan and Harry's fractured relationship with the monarchy. But when a respected royal expert leaned forward and revealed that the public had misunderstood one crucial event, the studio fell silent and the real story began to surface. Until that moment, the conversation had followed a familiar path: Meghan's difficult entry into royal life, Harry's growing anger toward the institution, the interviews that reopened old wounds, the rules, ceremonies, and expectations that seemed impossible to escape. Even their departure from senior royal duties had been discussed as though every motive was already known. Meghan wanted freedom. Harry wanted protection. The palace wanted obedience. It sounded simple. Then the expert paused. There was, the expert said, one hidden decision that changed everything. Not a public announcement. Not a furious confrontation. Not even the final agreement that pushed Meghan and Harry away from royal life. This decision had been made quietly, behind doors where promises could be offered without witnesses and withdrawn without explanation. The presenters appeared ready for another attack on Meghan. Perhaps another claim about ambition, control, or her refusal to understand tradition. But the expert's hesitation suggested something more dangerous. This revelation did not threaten Meghan alone. It could raise uncomfortable questions about senior advisors, private negotiations, and powerful royal figures who had spent years allowing the public to believe a cleaner version of events. The expert called it the arrangement behind the arrangement. That phrase changed the mood immediately. It suggested that Meghan had entered royal life with private assurances that were never reflected in official statements. She had allegedly been told that support would exist when the pressure became unbearable. Harry had believed those assurances because he had already watched the royal machine consume someone he loved. In his mind, the palace had promised that Meghan would not face the same isolation, suspicion, and silence that had once surrounded his mother. But promises inside the monarchy were rarely simple. They could sound firm in private and disappear when public pressure arrived. They could offer comfort without authority. And according to the expert, the devastating Truthbomb was not only about what Meghan did. It was about what she knew, what she expected, and what the institution allegedly took away when her position became too difficult to defend. That left one question hanging over the entire royal conflict. Was Meghan deliberately challenging the crown, or did she believe the crown had broken its word first? The expert drew a breath and prepared to identify the private event that turned tension into open war. But to understand why one sentence from a royal expert could reopen years of bitterness, the story had to return to the moment Meghan first entered a world where every welcome concealed a warning. Before the headlines, accusations, and public separation, Meghan was allegedly given a private assurance about her future inside the monarchy. It sounded compassionate, modern, and protective. Yet, according to the expert, that promise carried an invisible condition, one Meghan would not fully understand until it was too late. When Meghan first entered royal life, the moment seemed filled with possibility. She was welcomed as a symbol of change, a woman who could bring fresh energy to an institution often accused of being trapped by its own traditions. Public excitement grew quickly, but behind that excitement came a level of private examination few outsiders could survive. Every word mattered. Every gesture was judged. Even confidence could be interpreted as defiance. Harry was allegedly told that Meghan would be supported as she learned the demands of royal duty. Senior figures understood the pressure surrounding her, and they appeared to recognize his deepest fear that relentless attention, hostile coverage, and palace silence might create the same kind of suffering he had witnessed before. To Harry, the assurance was more than professional guidance. It was a personal promise that history would not be allowed to repeat itself. Meghan heard something equally powerful. She believed she would be permitted to keep an independent voice while serving the crown. Early encouragement made her feel she had not simply been invited to represent the monarchy, but to help modernize it. Her confidence, experience, and ability to connect with people beyond traditional royal circles appeared to be welcomed. But the palace operated by a different law. Individuality could be celebrated only while it served the larger institution. Once it threatened the balance of rank, influence, or public attention, it had to be contained. That was where the first hidden rivalry began. Some advisors saw Meghan as a valuable force who could reach new audiences and strengthen the monarchy's future. Others feared her popularity, her charitable influence, and her instinct to speak directly. What looked like success to the public began to feel dangerous behind palace doors. Soon, small disagreements carried far greater meaning. A statement was delayed. A schedule was changed. Clothing choices became arguments about image. Staffing decisions turned into tests of loyalty. Public appearances were controlled more tightly. None of these moments alone appeared dramatic, but together they created a pattern. The original promise was still repeated, yet its substance was slowly disappearing. Then came whispers of a confidential discussion about Meghan's role. A conversation in which her future was allegedly being narrowed without her direct involvement. Harry found himself trapped between protecting his wife and preserving ties with the family he had spent his entire life trying to understand. The promise had opened the door, but the palace's unwritten rules were already closing around them, and behind those rules stood a conflict no official announcement would ever admit. The palace publicly insisted that the royal household remained united. But behind carefully arranged appearances, another contest was allegedly unfolding. It was not simply Meghan against tradition or Harry against his family. It was a struggle over visibility, influence, and who would control the monarchy's future story. Inside royal life, power was rarely announced openly. It was communicated through smaller things: who entered first, who sat closest to the monarch, whose photograph appeared in an official release, which patronage received support, and who was quietly excluded from an invitation. To outsiders, these details seemed ceremonial. Inside the palace, they could define rank, loyalty, and future importance. Meghan's rapid rise in public attention disturbed that balance. She connected quickly with audiences, attracted international coverage, and appeared capable of building an identity that extended beyond traditional royal boundaries. For some courtiers, that energy was useful. For others, it was unpredictable. If Meghan and Harry became too powerful as a separate public force, controlling their role would become far more difficult. That contradiction began to consume Meghan. She was praised in public as a modern face of the monarchy, yet privately she felt her choices becoming narrower. The greater her visibility became, the less freedom she seemed to possess. Different palace offices were allegedly protecting different interests. Each household wanted its principal defended, respected, and never overshadowed. Cooperation slowly gave way to suspicion. A favorable story for one royal could become a threat to another. A delayed response could look like strategy. A private complaint could appear in the press days later. Briefings, leaks, and selective silence became weapons in a conflict no one officially admitted existed. Harry grew convinced that damaging stories about Meghan were being allowed to spread because they weakened the couple's independence. Palace advisors argued that answering every accusation would create an impossible precedent and feed the very crisis they were trying to contain. But Meghan believed silence was not neutral. When accusations damaged her character, relationships, and emotional security, refusing to respond felt like permission for the attacks to continue. The first major turning point came when the couple allegedly requested a clear public correction. The response was delayed, softened, or refused. After that, Meghan began documenting conversations. Verbal promises no longer felt safe. According to the expert, One particular document would later become central to their decision to leave. Harry recognized a pattern he feared deeply: pressure outside, silence within, and a loved one slowly losing faith in the institution. The most dangerous conflict, the expert explained, had never appeared in an official photograph. It existed inside a proposed agreement that was discussed, trusted, and never formally secured. That hidden agreement was meant to prevent a royal disaster. But when its most important protection disappeared, Meghan and Harry were forced to decide whether remaining inside the palace was more dangerous than walking away. Then, the royal expert finally delivered the claim that changed the entire conversation. Meghan's most controversial decisions were not, in this dramatized account, spontaneous acts of rebellion. She allegedly believed senior palace figures had already approved a different future for her and Harry before quietly withdrawing their support. According to the expert, conversations about a hybrid royal arrangement had begun far earlier than the public understood. Meghan and Harry allegedly believed they could continue supporting the monarch while gaining more control over where they lived, how they communicated, which charitable projects they pursued, and how they built financial independence. It was not complete freedom, and it was not a full departure. It was supposed to be a middle path. The proposal may never have become a signed agreement. No final document had secured every detail. Yet the discussions were allegedly serious enough for the couple to believe the idea had been accepted in principle. That distinction changed the entire emotional meaning of what followed. Meghan may not have thought she was inventing a rebellious new role. She may have believed she was pursuing a future the palace had already acknowledged behind closed doors. Then the support began to weaken. As public criticism intensified, resistance inside the family allegedly grew. Advisors raised constitutional concerns. Senior figures feared the arrangement could create confusion over who represented the crown and who operated independently. What had once sounded possible suddenly became dangerous. For Meghan, the shift felt devastating. Private reassurance had given her hope, but when institutional pressure arrived, that reassurance offered no protection. The palace could deny that a firm promise had ever been made. Meghan could insist that the meaning had been unmistakable. Both sides could describe the same conversations and reach completely different truths. Harry was reportedly furious. What he had understood as commitments were now being dismissed as informal possibilities. To him, the language had changed only after the couple relied upon it. To palace officials, nothing had been formally approved, and Meghan's demand for certainty began to sound less like a request and more like an ultimatum. The expert claimed the information came from someone familiar with those internal discussions, but refused to reveal the source. That silence only deepened the tension. The studio no longer felt as though it were hearing another simple accusation against Meghan. It was hearing the outline of a broken expectation powerful enough to divide a family and shake an institution. Critics would argue Meghan heard what she wanted to hear. Supporters would say the palace deliberately kept its promises vague so they could later be withdrawn without responsibility. And that became the question at the heart of the conflict. Did Meghan expose a palace retreat, or did she mistake sympathy for authorization? But the expert warned that the hybrid proposal was only one part of the truth bomb. Another private disagreement had made compromise almost impossible. The hidden arrangement explained why Meghan felt betrayed, but it did not explain why the palace resisted so fiercely, and the answer led directly to money, titles, inheritance, and the future power of Harry's children. What appeared to be a family disagreement was now becoming a battle over the future. Titles carried constitutional meaning. Money created control. Security determined freedom. And behind every negotiation stood an unspoken fear that Meghan and Harry might build a rival royal identity beyond the palace's reach. For Harry, his title was not merely a formal label. It was tied to birth, family, history, and the only world he had ever known. He may have believed that stepping back from daily duty should not erase the identity he had carried since childhood. Palace officials allegedly saw the matter differently. A royal title could not be separated easily from service, discipline, and responsibility to the crown. Using it publicly while operating independently risked creating confusion over where royal duty ended and private ambition began. Meghan's concern was more immediate. If they stepped away without firm protections, the family could be left exposed. Financially, emotionally, physically, security became one of the most painful questions in the talks because it represented more than guards and official arrangements. It became a test of belonging. If protection disappeared, did that mean the institution no longer considered Harry and his family part of its responsibility? Then came money. The couple wanted financial independence, but earning it created another trap. Commercial projects could provide freedom, yet any use of their royal identity risked accusations that they were profiting from the monarchy. Palace advisors feared a partially independent Sussex household could command global attention without accepting the limits placed on working royals. Meghan and Harry saw opportunity. The institution saw a possible rival power center. Behind every argument stood the children. Meghan was determined to protect them from the emotional pressures that had shaped Harry's life. She wanted distance from a system where affection, rank, and public duty could become dangerously tangled. The palace allegedly feared that future choices involving the children might place emotional pressure on the monarchy or become part of a public campaign for concessions. Inheritance made the divide even deeper. It was not only about wealth or property. It meant access to family traditions, royal history, private relationships, and a sense of belonging that money could never replace. Harry knew that leaving might protect his immediate family, but it could also weaken his children's connection to the world that had formed him. Meghan began to fear that delay itself was the strategy. If discussions continued long enough, exhaustion might force them to accept a role with little real independence. Then came the second layer of the experts' claim. Several protections the couple expected were allegedly available only if they remained fully active royals. Both sides now felt trapped. The palace feared creating a precedent. Meghan and Harry believed they were being punished for asking for autonomy, and when their private timetables suddenly moved toward public exposure, compromise began to collapse. The negotiations might still have survived behind closed doors, but once the private timetable escaped into public view, every unresolved fear became a weapon, and someone had to be blamed. For weeks, both sides had hidden behind carefully chosen words. Then, the Sussex announcement appeared, and the palace's private crisis became a global spectacle. Within minutes, competing versions of the truth began spreading, and the possibility of a quiet compromise vanished almost instantly. For Meghan and Harry, the decision carried the force of desperation. They allegedly believed delay had become a weapon. Every unanswered question gave others more time to narrow the proposal, redefine its meaning, or stop it entirely. If they waited, they feared the future they had discussed would be taken from them before the public even knew it had existed. So they moved first. The announcement described a new role that sounded remarkably close to the hybrid arrangement Meghan believed had already been explored. They would step back from senior duties, pursue financial independence, and continue supporting the monarch. To the couple, this was not a declaration of war. It was the public shape of a private plan they thought the palace understood. Senior royal figures saw something very different. They felt blindsided by the timing and furious that unfinished negotiations had been exposed before the family had reached a final decision. The wording appeared to claim an outcome that had not been formally approved. Within the palace, shock hardened into anger. Then came the official response. It was brief, controlled, and devastating. By saying that discussions remained at an early stage, the institution quietly distanced itself from the couple's version of events. Harry immediately understood the danger. The announcement now looked reckless, unauthorized, almost rebellious. What he believed had been a serious proposal was being presented as if it had never advanced beyond wishful thinking. Meghan recognized that the battle had changed. It was no longer only about titles, security, money, or duty. It was about credibility. Whoever controlled the public timeline would control who appeared betrayed and who appeared unreasonable. Pressure grew to remove language, suggesting that the Sussexes could continue collaborating with the monarch on their own terms. Media coverage turned a procedural dispute into a royal rupture filled with accusations of rejection, humiliation, and disloyalty. Every headline pushed the family further from compromise. The emotional cost was immediate. Meghan left the United Kingdom while Harry remained behind to face the final negotiations. Alone among people he loved but no longer trusted, he was forced to choose between loyalty to the crown and loyalty to his wife. Some relatives allegedly saw the announcement as an unforgivable breach. Others quietly understood that communication had already failed long before the public statement appeared. According to the expert, the announcement was not the beginning of the plan. It was the desperate release of an arrangement the couple believed had already been privately entertained. But the final settlement removed much of that middle path. The hybrid future disappeared, leaving a cleaner and far harsher separation. The palace had regained control of the arrangement, but control came at a price. Because the settlement did not end the conflict, it carried every private wound into a new and far more dangerous arena. Outside the palace, Meghan and Harry finally possessed the freedom they had demanded. But freedom brought a new temptation: the power to tell their version without royal approval. Every interview promised relief, yet every revelation widened the distance between them and the family they had left behind. Their new life carried a powerful contradiction. They had escaped the rules that once controlled their movements, words, and future. But independence came with financial pressure, media expectations, and grief that distance could not erase. They were free to speak, yet every sentence now carried consequences. Meghan allegedly believed silence had already cost her too much. Anonymous briefings had shaped her public image, while official restraint allowed damaging claims to harden into accepted truth. Speaking openly, in her mind, was not revenge. It was correction. She was reclaiming a story she believed had been written by people who never intended to let her defend herself. Harry's motivation was deeply personal. He wanted the world to understand why he had chosen his wife and children over the institution that raised him. Yet he also wanted something that became harder to achieve with every disclosure: accountability from his family without losing his place within it. The monarchy operated differently. Its survival depended on restraint, controlled language, and the refusal to answer every accusation. What Meghan and Harry saw as cold silence, palace figures viewed as discipline. Each side believed its method was necessary. Each disclosure drew global attention, but it also made private reconciliation more difficult. Critics claimed the interviews proved Meghan had always intended to turn royal experience into commercial influence. Her supporters argued that public platforms were the only tools available after the palace denied her an effective voice from within. But the experts' Truthbomb gave those interviews a darker emotional meaning. Meghan's deepest grievance was allegedly not that every request had been rejected. It was that expectations had first been encouraged, then quietly withdrawn when defending them became inconvenient. Memory now became another battlefield. Meghan and Harry remembered assurances. Palace figures remembered possibilities. One side heard commitment, the other heard discussion. The same meetings produced completely different histories. The expert suggested the unnamed source may have spoken because the public story had become dangerously simple. Yet, the revelation created panic inside royal circles. Acknowledging early negotiations could make past statements appear incomplete. It also placed Meghan under pressure, raising an uncomfortable question: if the proposed arrangement mattered so deeply, why had she not explained it clearly before? Behind that question waited an even greater consequence. Harry had gained the freedom to challenge the monarchy, but each challenge made his future within royal history more uncertain. The experts' claim had reopened the case, but the final question was no longer whether Meghan had been exposed, it was whether the entire royal system had been exposed with her. By the end of the revelation, Meghan was neither completely vindicated nor completely condemned. The palace was neither innocent nor defeated. Instead, the truth bomb exposed something more unsettling: a royal system where private reassurance, public duty, family love, and institutional survival could never exist without colliding. Meghan had been exposed, but perhaps not in the way her critics expected. She emerged as someone who may have acted from a deep sense of broken trust rather than from a simple hunger for rebellion. If she truly believed the palace had accepted a different future for her and Harry, then her later defiance carried the force of betrayal. Yet the same revelation exposed her vulnerability. Inside the monarchy, sympathy was not approval. Encouragement was not permission. A private conversation could feel like a promise to one person and remain only a possibility to another. That uncertainty complicated the accusation that the Sussex departure had been planned solely for fame, money, or revenge. The experts' claim suggested that Meghan and Harry had first searched for a way to remain connected. But by forcing the dispute into public view, they may have destroyed the very flexibility they hoped to protect. The monarchy survived through ambiguity. Difficult ideas could be discussed without becoming official. Reassurance could calm a crisis without binding the crown. That method protected the institution, but it could devastate anyone who interpreted royal words personally. Harry's tragedy became impossible to ignore. He had acted to prevent history from repeating itself. He wanted to protect his wife from isolation, pressure, and silence. Yet in doing so, he created another royal fracture that might follow him for the rest of his life. Meghan's legacy remained equally divided. To some, she was the disruptive outsider who challenged a system she never fully understood. To others, she was a woman who refused to surrender control of her identity simply to preserve a perfect royal image. The palace preserved its traditional structure, but victory carried a cost. Its silence appeared disciplined to supporters and emotionally cold to critics. Somewhere inside the royal world, the expert's unnamed source had apparently decided that the hidden negotiations should not disappear completely. Perhaps documents, messages, or private recollections will one day reveal how close the hybrid arrangement came to reality. Until then, the truth bomb proves neither side entirely right. It reveals something more painful. Both sides may have believed they were betrayed. And that leaves the final question unresolved. Could Harry and his family ever reconcile without first agreeing on what was promised behind closed doors? And until those hidden conversations are fully revealed, the most devastating royal truth may remain unchanged. Inside the monarchy, the promises that matter most are often the ones no one is willing to admit were ever made.